We begin with the park. This park was started sometime in the early 1940s. At that time, Oscar was a part of this community here. This was his home, part of his territory. Territories of a big gator like Oscar probably was in the neighborhood of 800 to 1,000 acres. So that means for maybe a half a mile or more out into the swamp. And he probably had 15 or 20 other girlfriends that he had to visit every year. Occasionally he could come up through here, through Circulate, before the park was built. And then when they started building the park, Oscar didn't mind them. He tolerated us and allowed us to be here. As a matter of fact, he became a part of the community of construction when they were excavating for trails and excavating for ponds and building up little islands in the park here. He was right there, part of it, but he never was a problem. Never was a problem to anyone. He became very possessive of that little pond up to our outside and up to the camellia garden. That became his territory also, and that's where he would usually meet his girlfriends, where they would play house. Then in 1941 or 42, they began building the park. They began building it, and they literally built the park around Oscar, where they worked wherever he was not. But yet he was not an aggressive critter. He was very tolerant of people, and actually became a part of the community of the park many years ago. However, on the morning of July the 16th, the evening of July the 16th, or the morning of the 17th, Oscar didn't show up. A friend, a guy, his name was Howard Hunt. He was a gator researcher. He'd been watching Oscar for a couple of years. He came on that day by chance to come and make some more observations. What year was that? That was in July of '07. July of '07, either the night of the 16th or the morning of the 17th, sometime in that period, he died. And Howard Hunt found him on the morning of the 17th. At that time, then Martin Bell called me and asked if I would like to be a part of recovering part of Oscar, and I said I'd love to be there. I immediately came out. We picked him up, took him around back to behind the serpentarium, and we had an operation. We eviscerated him, took out all his major organs, and examined each one as we removed them to check for any abnormal conditions. Then we discarded all the viscera after they examined it, and then we put Oscar into a large bear trap, a huge bear trap that could be closed on both ends. And Billy Dawson picked it up with the front loader and took it out into the woods, and we let him decay. Let the natural process of decay go on. And about October, we began to take him, we brought him back. We set up the 60-gallon boiler, syrup boiler up there, to cook him in. Of course, he couldn't all get in there at once, but in pieces. We dissected him and put him in, cooked him. That loosened up all the excess flesh and skin and bones and things and separated a lot of them. we then spent a lady named Sharon Kane, who was an employee of the park, and a public nurse, a public service nurse, and she was doing service time. We began to clean up the bones. We had to extract and clean and brush and scrub and every possible method of cleaning the bones we could. And as we did that, we bleached each one, bleached all of them, and began to classify them immediately. All these little bones like this, fingers and toes, they go in one box. All the long bones in another box. Ribs, vertebra, etc., etc. And I don't know. They had an I don't know box because they had some bones. Gators have bones that I had never seen before, and I've done some dissections. But we also found a book, The Alligator and Its Allies by Robert Moore, published in 1915. That was the most accurate description of an alligator that I found anywhere, down to the toenails. Very, very inclusive of every facet of a gator's body. So that was a lifesaver as far as identifying anything in him. It took us, as I began to isolate the bones and figure out how we're going to put them together, I discovered we're going to have some long rods to go down through the vertebra to hold that vertebral column together. So I went to town and I went to the International Business Machine Company, and the boss's name was Ronald Dial. Ron Dial was the owner of the business. And he said, I asked him, I explained what I wanted, and he said, not only that, I'll give you somebody to work with you. And we'll be glad to support you. And from then on, that company was a major part of identifying and solving the problems of how to suspend Oscar in a position that looks like he's ready to take a step. And it looks like he probably looked during life, except he has no skin, no muscles, etc. He gave me a fellow named Jim Brewer, who was a fanatic about things being accurate. And that's just what I needed, because I would just throw it together. Jim was very accurate and very deliberate, and it had to be just exactly right. And he's still the same way today. He's still the same way. Took us 2.5 years to put Oscar together. 2.5 years. But we finally finished him up in the building in the back where the other gator named Roy is also mounted. And then we put him all together and rolled him up here. Rolled him in this cage. This whole case we had manufactured just for this purpose. That took some engineering work also to get all the lights in the right places underneath. At any rate, when we dissected Oscar, in his stomach we found a number of things. We found lots of grasses, lots of rocks. We found bones of turtles, bones of fish, bones of other gators, because big gators eat little gators. And we also found a dog collar and a dog tag, and the name of the little dog was Peaches. I can just see this little white fuzzy ball running around the back end of a car, and Oscar, that's like trolling. trolling for Oscar. So he took advantage of it and he just swallowed it whole. I saw Oscar come by here. He'd been somewhere and caught him another dog. He caught a full-grown Labrador Retriever, black lab, and it stuck out this far on both sides of his mouth. And he came up this way, came under that bridge right behind there, and was going to take him on up to the gator pond for his private dining. So he was very capable of catching anything that was close to the water. So we. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Living in this water, tannic acid colored water, stains almost everything in it, and has an impact on it. Alligator teeth, and Oscar has about 75 to 80 teeth. Big gators will carry that many. They were all black. They were black from, I guess it was tartar and whatever else accumulates on gator teeth. So I cleaned them up. I took a little Dremel tool and cleaned up every tooth, but I couldn't put them back in. I didn't know where they went. They were when they die, all their teeth fall out. Their teeth fall out, and the problem is there's another tooth right behind it. Inside there, every tooth is underlain by several new teeth. So we called on a fellow named Jackie Carter that lived down the road here, just about 10 miles, because he puts them together, and he takes the whole skull apart and puts them back together and sells them. And I have one of his skulls. His teeth are replaced probably annually. Most of his teeth will be crushed or broken from a bite. When they bite down, they create a pressure of 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of pressure. That'll crush any little tooth he has. So when that happens, another one will push out the broken stub and come right down or up out of the same socket. And they do that well, Oscar did it all of his life, because you see here he was close to 90 or 100 years old, and he still has all of his teeth. So however, the population of gators began to fall in this country because people were beginning to kill them. They sell their hide, they sell the meat, and also eat the meat. And the early settlers, this was meat for months at a time. Oscar had been shot by a rifle or a pistol, and you can see the hole right here. Right there is the hole where the bullet went through his skull. See that right in? Can you see that, Tim? Yeah. That's a bullet hole right there that has begun to heal. The amazing thing about reptiles is most of them can regenerate bone, skin, muscle, major body parts. I suppose that's a survival technique. And then he also had been shot by a shotgun several times. And these little tiny holes in the top of his head here, those pocks, those tiny holes, I dug out most of those lead pellets. I wish I'd left them all in there now. But of course that was under his skin and next to the bone. Consequently, he was suffering from lead poisoning for the last 60 years, because this park's been here about 50 or 60 years. And so we know it didn't happen while the park's been here. So he was suffering from lead poisoning, gunshot wounds, survival. Of course, some of them went all the way through his mouth and out the floor of his mouth. So he'd have to go for weeks and months without eating. But that's no problem for a gator. They can do that. They have no problem with some crocodiles can go for as much as a year without eating. We actually assembled all the bones together, and once we figured out where each bone went, once we began to assemble it, Jim Brewer and his company designed this suspension system. This suspension system consists of 2, 4, 6, 7 major support rods that are attached to the frame of this display case, and then also underneath each one of those is a little thin cable, a very thin cable. They're kind of hard to see, and that of course was the purpose of it. But that's what holds him up off of the table. He also suffered from osteoporosis, and you can see that here, and especially here. These two paddle bones, these two bones, that corroded area above that little paddle bone. See, there's two. Those are really his pelvic bones, the pelvic bones, and they are a part of his respiratory system. That is what makes him breathe. That is attached to a large membrane that encompasses all of his viscera, the kidneys, the stomach, the liver, and the liver is massive. And when he inhales, it pulls back on that. These paddles pull back, and so air flows into his mouth, into his pharynx. And when he exhales, these muscles relax, and the mass of viscera moves back forward again, and he exhales. So that's when this paddle broke loose. When this one broke loose, of course, then this lung on this side, the right side, did not work. So that's why when we dissected his body, we found no functional lung on the right side. Only the left side worked. Some particular problems we had was with the shoulder girdle. Right here is the scapula, and this is the breastbone, the sternum. All of this had to be put together, and we fortunately got in touch with some guys at the University of Ohio and the University of Indiana, and both of them were experts on gator anatomy. They sent us a CD with all the bones that we had a problem with, and these were a problem: the wrist bones, and the ankle bones. Something's wrong with my light. The wrist bones in the foot and the hand up here were a particular problem. They sent us a CD, and it made an image of them, and they all would flow together to that point where they become a part of the foot. The ankle bones here and the ankle bones here and the wrist bones there were a particular problem to put together. But we finally figured it out, and we finally figured out what all these little tiny bones were: abdominal ribs. We just never suspected that there were ribs that would on part of his stomach, but they have abdominal ribs, thoracic ribs, and these right here are cervical ribs. Back here, behind the trunk of the body, down here is all the caudal area, or the tail. The tail is about half of the total body length. Its function is, first of all, locomotion. Second is a fat storage area. That's where they store their energy, in that big, heavy tail. Then when we cleaned up these bones down here, see, these are unique to crocodilians. These bones on the bottom side of the tail, these little tiny bones all the way back to here, these little tiny bones down here, all of those are called chevron bones, because they're shaped like this, and they articulate with the vertebra in front and the vertebra behind, so they fit right into the joint between every one of them. When I finally figured out what they were, we found that one of them was missing. One of them was missing half of the shaft of and we finally found out that it was the second one. The second chevron bone was missing. And right here, right there, is where I took it to a friend of mine, Dr. Wibby Dial. You might remember him. Dr. Dial, I took it to him, and he said he could fix it. He said, that's what I do every day. So in about a week, he called me back and said, yeah, I got it ready for you. And see, I gave him this one, and the broken part of that one, and the third and the fourth. I gave him the first 4, including the broken one. And he made it look real again. As you know, alligators are engineers. They build their own. If they can't find water, they make a pond. They bite off a big chunk of floating peat, and they create a pond. Some of them are as large as this room here. Others may only be, half this size or a third this size. But gator holes are a favorite fishing place for most of the people who know how to fish in the swamp. They go find gator holes, especially along the red trail. Okay, let's see. Oh, the bones on top, all of these up here, these are called scutes, S-C-U-T-E-S, scutes. And they have anywhere from 200 to 300 of those on big alligators. Because of the nature of plastic, we could not make it bend compound. It would bend one way, but it won't bend that way. It won't bend twice in opposite directions. So we couldn't put them all on here, but we had a problem figuring out what their order was. And as soon as we looked at a picture, let me get a picture for you. There was a matrix, there's a pattern, there's an order to this. And if you get down and look at them, they're in rows horizontally all the way across. If you look at them, they're in rows across. And if you get up to the head and look back through there, there's a horizontal row too. So there's two. So there's a matrix, a pattern, and we had Roy back there also already put together. So that's how we solved that problem of how to get that thing. So being an engineer, they do create fishing holes. So that's habitat for everything else. Frogs, fish, ducks, turtles, snakes, birds. So gators are actually a part of the system. They're not just, a predator. They serve many roles in the swamp.